All right, folks, let's dive into a story that hasn't made huge headlines yet, but I think it's one of those quiet, behind-the-scenes developments that could really shape politics on both sides of the Atlantic in the years ahead. I'm talking about how Britain's Labour Party, under Prime Minister Keir Starmer, is quietly keeping up ties with Democrats in the US. Even though Donald Trump is back in the White House and the Democrats are still licking their wounds after that brutal election loss. Now, why does this matter? Because it's not just about polite diplomatic chats or exchanging souvenirs. What's happening here is part of a bigger effort, some might even say a dream, to rebuild a global center-left alliance, a sort of playbook for how progressive parties and democracies can not just win elections, but actually govern in an era where populism, anger, and disillusionment with traditional politics are everywhere. So let me walk you through what's going on, why it matters, and where I think this could lead. First, let's set the stage. On one side of the Atlantic, Donald Trump stormed back into the White House this January. Democrats are scattered, demoralized, and for now, they don't even have a clear frontrunner for 2028. President Biden is gone from the scene. Vice President Harris has stepped back after her failed campaign, and the party is basically searching for its next identity. On the other side, in Britain, Labour pulled off a landslide election win in 2024. Keir Starmer, the former lawyer with a reputation for caution and process, walked into Downing Street after more than a decade of conservative rule. But here's the catch. Once the euphoria faded, reality hit hard. The Labour government has been drowning in crises, from cabinet scandals to falling approval ratings to pressure from the populist Reform UK party, led by Nigel Farage. So you've got this strange situation. One progressive party just got wiped out. Another just won big but is already losing steam. And yet, instead of pulling back, some people in Starmer's inner circle are saying, wait a second, maybe this is the perfect moment to think bigger. Maybe we can start piecing together a global center-left strategy. Now here's where things get interesting. Politico recently reported that Starmer's chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney, has been playing a key role in keeping those Labour-Democrat connections alive. Even while Starmer himself has been bending over backward to make nice with Trump, McSweeney has been cultivating relationships with Democratic operatives, strategists, and even potential future candidates. There was even a small but symbolic moment earlier this year. Gretchen Whitmer, the Democratic governor of Michigan and a potential 2028 presidential candidate, visited London on a trade mission. She ran into McSweeney, and the two had a conversation about Labour's big election victory. At the end, she gave him a gift, a Michigan-made wooden pen worth about £90. Now, on the surface that might sound like just a nice little gesture, but in politics, small, symbolic things often carry weight. That pen was a reminder that even though the Democrats are out of power, they still have connections in Britain, and Labour is eager to keep the door open. And that's not an isolated case. Behind the scenes, Labour staffers, MPs, and think tank folks have been meeting with their American counterparts, sometimes publicly, sometimes very quietly. These meetings are about more than just exchanging talking points. They're about figuring out, what does a modern center-left party even look like in 2025? Now, a lot of this work doesn't happen through elected politicians directly. It happens through think tanks. On the British side, you've got the Institute for Public Policy Research, Labour's longtime ally. On the American side, you've got the Center for American Progress, Third Way, and the Progressive Policy Institute. These groups hold summits, workshops, and private meetings where staffers, advisors, and up-and-coming politicians can swap ideas. For example, at the upcoming Global Progress Action Summit in London, leaders from both sides of the Atlantic will be there. Britain's new Deputy Prime Minister, David Lammy, who also happens to be an old friend of Barack Obama, is set to appear alongside Pete Buttigieg, the former Democratic presidential candidate who still might have a future shot at the White House. The summit will also feature quiet, closed-door sessions where aides from Britain, the US, Australia, Spain, and elsewhere can talk shop, sharing notes on how to handle housing crises, how to deal with social media's political impact, and how to manage immigration pressures without fueling populism. And the person shaping a lot of this, again, Morgan McSweeney. He's been described by insiders as the architect, the one trying to write an actual playbook for progressive governance. Now, you might be asking, why bother? Why would Labor risk cozying up to Democrats when Trump is in power? And watching closely. After all, during the 2024 campaign, Trump's team accused Labor of foreign interference because some British activists had volunteered for Kamala Harris's campaign. That created a mini scandal that Starmer's team definitely doesn't want to repeat. And you're right, that's risky. If Starmer is seen as too close to Democrats, it could backfire with Trump, who is famously thin-skinned and doesn't like anyone playing both sides. But here's the thing. Starmer's people know that Trump won't be in power forever. Sooner or later, Democrats will be back. And when that day comes, Labor wants to be in the driver's seat, ready to shape a shared agenda, not just in Britain or America, but across the Western world. Here's the part that really grabbed me. This isn't just about Labor and the Democrats. This is about the fact that center-left parties across the world are struggling. In Spain, in Australia, in Germany, in Canada, you name it, progressive governments are either fighting for survival or losing ground to right-wing populists. Why? Because voters are frustrated. They're angry about the cost of living. They're anxious about immigration. They're skeptical of globalization, of big institutions, of politicians who seem more like managers than visionaries. That's the problem for Starmer. He won big, but he hasn't yet given people a story, a vision that feels inspiring. Same goes for the Democrats in the US. They had some policy wins under Biden, but they failed to connect emotionally with voters. And Trump's simple America First message beat them. So what McSweeney and others are trying to do is figure out, how do we create a new kind of progressive politics? Something that's not old-school Clinton-Blair third-way centrism, but also not left-wing populism. Something pragmatic, but also inspiring. Now let me give you my perspective. Personally, I think this effort makes sense. If progressives in different countries don't talk to each other, they'll just keep repeating the same mistakes. Britain can learn from America's failures. America can learn from Britain's struggles, and maybe together, they can come up with new strategies. But, and this is a big but, there are two huge pitfalls. First, the risk of appearing disconnected. If these global summits just become rooms full of policy wonks talking about frameworks and blueprints, regular voters aren't going to care. People don't want to hear about progressive governance structures. They want to know how they'll pay their bills, whether their kids can buy a home, whether their job will still exist in 10 years. If Labor and the Democrats can't connect their global conversations to people's everyday lives, it won't matter. Second, the risk of underestimating populists. While progressives hold summits in London, Nigel Farage is out there promising mass deportations, and Trump is hammering on immigration and nationalism. Those messages cut through. They're simple, emotional, and easy to repeat. Progressives need to find equally powerful stories, not just policies. So, to wrap this up, what we're seeing right now is a quiet but important attempt to rebuild a transatlantic progressive network. Labor's inner circle, especially Morgan McSweeney, is reaching out to Democrats, to think tanks, to up-and-coming leaders like Gretchen Whitmer and Pete Buttigieg. They're trying to draft a playbook for center-left governments that could work in this turbulent era. Will it succeed? Honestly, it's too early to say. Starmer's government is already wobbling at home, and Democrats are still lost in the wilderness. But here's the thing. If they don't try, the alternative is clear. More Trump, more Farage, more right-wing populists filling the void. And that, folks, is why this story matters. It's not just about Britain and America. It's about whether the center-left, the progressive movement worldwide, can actually find a way to survive and thrive in the 21st century. So let me throw it back to you. Do you think this kind of global progressive alliance has any chance of working? Or is it just elites talking to elites while regular voters tune out? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks for watching. See you next time.